Hello and welcome to our webinar this morning. We are LitheSpeed, Trusted Business Agility Advisors, and we're here today to talk about Scrum at Scale. I want to make sure we have some people on the line, so if you can find the chat and tell us where you're from. Type in there. Okay, our chat box is bottom right. I see one from Tucson, Arizona, and that's me. There we are. Our panelist is on the line. So today we have Managing Agile Consultant from LitheSpeed, Luiz Q. Quintela. Please call him Q, and he's going to walk us through some Scrum at Scale basics today. Q has more than 30 years experience in the software industry and specializes in virtualization, the cloud, DevOps, Agile, and most importantly, scaling Scrum. This webinar is worth 1 PMI PDU and Scrum Alliance SEU. So we'll send an email with the links to that at the end of this so you can claim your education credits. All right, Q, take it away.
Thank you, Audrey, and here we go. Thank you guys for coming here and hearing about Scrum at Scale. We should run for approximately 45 minutes or so, and feel free to type questions in the box, and Audrey will keep tab of those. If we can, we answer the question immediately, otherwise we'll postpone them for the end of the section. Thank you. So here we go with Scrum at Scale. And we have a little bit of intro. And Scrum at Scale is to formalize the work that has been done since 1983. It's actually funny, a lot of people think this is new. It's not. It's been around for quite some time. It just probably like just a formal name. But that's what Scrum at Scale is, to formalize this work done from 83 on up to now and help you achieve strategic agility today. So, Audrey, can we jump our first poll, please?
So we have a poll to see how familiar are you with Scrum at Scale? So that's popping up on your screen. Let us know if you've never heard of Scrum at Scale, this is your first time hearing about it, or you're familiar or you're using it, very familiar. All right, responses rolling in, and a couple more seconds. And we'll close the poll. Here are our results.
Okay, so let's continue.
Okay, and I do see that people have chatted where they're from. So we see Portland, Oregon, Atlanta, San Diego with 2 exclamations, and some Houston, another Portland, and Atlanta. So welcome.
We have quite a crowd. That's great. So, Scrum at Scale consider all the dimensions. We think about scale, we think about the number of teams you have to coordinate work between multiple teams, sometimes quite a large number of teams, you know, and the complexity of projects, how are they distributed geographically? Nowadays, we have teams pretty much everywhere. I worked in projects that had people in 9 countries, and it was quite challenging to coordinate with them. The saturation, which by that we mean how pervasive is Scrum in your organization? Did we break down all those traditional silos, those territorial things? This is my department and my empire and that sort of thing. And consider velocity too. Only a well-performing team will scale linearly, and that's very important to emphasize. So linear scalability, is that really achievable? You know, can you launch a lot of teams, hundreds, even thousands? Could the whole business operate that manner? They learn how to do that. Can you improve corporate performance? So those are very interesting questions. And I point you, when you get the PDF, there is a very good article to read from Harvard Business Review talking about Scrum of Scale. And the link will be there, as you see in this slide, and I recommend us reading. What does that mean? So is that one person complete one story, so 1,000 people can complete 1,000 stories? Can we make 1 million a day with 1,000 people working on it? So the secret, like everything Scrum related, is to have a Scrum Master that helps the team achieve, but a product owner is a fundamental part of this. We usually think so much about the role of the Scrum Master, and we tend to have product owners that are not as great as the Scrum Master. So we have to have both to achieve linear scalability. We also have to have what it's called scale-free architecture, and every time I use this name, people say, well, that's counterintuitive. You're saying scale-free, and then you're talking about scaling. Well, the idea behind this is, this actually came from Intel. They use this name to describe how easy it is in hardware to put things together and basically linearly scale them. You know, it can group things together and just keep growing and growing and growing. Every time you think it's not possible to cram more circuits in a wafer, you're proven wrong, you know, and it still keeps growing. So that's why we use the word scale free. Otherwise, you're going to introduce waste. You have layers that don't need to be there. You need people who don't need to be there. You have functions that don't need to be there. And that way, you are never going to linearly scale anything. A good analogy is from biology. For instance, neural networks, which you see in this slide, where things just plug together and they create a larger organism, which is much more complex, but it's built by very simple building blocks. And it evolves really quickly, it adapts, it can create new functions, and evolves in that way. So it's important to think as a scale-free architecture in order to think linear scalability. When you talk about Scrum at scale, you usually think this is new. The first prototype was actually 1983. It was Mid-Continent Computer Services, had 150 banks across the US and Canada. That was ATMs, multiple vendors. Dr. Jeff Sutherland was the VP, the CTO for all the banks. And a recommendation that came from that is an entrepreneurial company within the larger company and with a complete different operating model than it was the case in 1983. But that was the first Scrum scale prototype, so it's not something new. It has been very refined and well developed over the years. That model was to have a bias for action, to be close to the customer, to be autonomous, to be productive through people, hands-on, value-driven, all those things that we talk a lot nowadays. This was already being discussed 35 years ago. And as it is part of Scrum, one job title, member technical staff. That's even older than 1983. That actually started in 1975 with Brian Kernighan, the creator of the C language. So a lot of the things that we today think are modern concepts, they have been for a while, and they work very well because there's so many years of experience behind them. And in the first Scrum at Scale prototype, we had the notion of putting every employee that touch an ATA system to be one business and run like a startup. We emphasized the small teams, 4 or 5 people, maybe 6 at most, because small teams communicate really quick, very productive. You don't have a lot of people having to talk to a lot of people and introducing more delays. The backlogs are prioritized on Monday, and on Friday was deployed, 1 week sprint. A lot of people still can do that these days. And there was a monthly retrospective and a big room planning session. So concepts that are are not new and have been put in place multiple times. There were massive results. As you see, it started with the cost exceeding revenue by 30%. In 6 months was the other way around. The revenue is exceeding the cost by 30%. There was a 60% swing in margins, and this eventually evolved into Pegasystems in 2017. And you can see the stock graphic that shows you how much this grew by just using a very simple solution. And there are other companies who face the same reality. For instance, Toyota, 3M, GE, many others, 25% of the staff delivering stories the customers actually use, 45% delivering stuff that rarely gets used, and 30% of the staff actually building stuff that nobody uses. In my experience, that's actually very optimistic. I've seen waste way beyond 30% in the years that I've been in the industry. So it's still prevalent, it still exists, but a lot of companies dealt with this in many ways, as we will see. So imagine something like that, right? So 25%, you have 5% of process efficiency. So you're delivering at 1.25%. So if you grow this to 5%, you are actually doing twice the work in half the time, which is a great target to aim for. So Amazon has a great implementation of Scrum. They have 3,300 Scrum teams, and they deliver a new feature to production more than once a second. And usually people ask me, well, but must be something really small that they deploy to production. Well, first of all, you have to define small. And second is, doing small deployments has also the advantage to minimize risk. One of the things I discuss a lot with my clients is they have this notion that a version should include 5 buckets plus the kitchen sink. Be very large, because large means that you have a lot of value. Okay, but you also have a lot of risk. And it's very difficult to roll back things that are very large when they go out and for some reason something doesn't work. So it's also interesting to think about delivering very small increments very often to have value always being delivered with the minimum risk possible. So Amazon has a quote that stable teams, which is something that it's paramount to have, they grow in maturity, in agility, they get better and better and better. They are easily and widely available, and they adopt Scrum as Scrum should be. Amazon also has a very strong definition of done, and they use a lot of automation, as you can see by the graphic. They invest a lot in automation, in DevOps, in having processes that don't require manual approvals or gates that requires multiple people to rubber stamp and sign on and sign off, which doesn't mean we don't have gates. We just have them automated to increase the efficiency of the process and allow things like things being delivered every second to production. Our challenging when we scale are in regards to bureaucracy and hierarchy. The more bureaucracy you have, the more decision latency you introduce. And every time that it takes long to decide on something, you are actually wasting, you are actually spending money that doesn't need to be spent. Sign-offs are another source of waste. If you wait for somebody to sign off on something going to production, just because they need to sign off, this is actually going to get you into even more latency and even more waste. Layers upon layers of managers just deciding on when things go out, regardless of the fact that they've been tested. They are done by a strong definition of done, and everything is automated, but you have all these layers of people. So what Scrum at Scale proposes is to have a minimum viable bureaucracy. So we reduce the latency and we have things running as quickly as possible. So imagine the fragility. There is two great examples of fragility. One is Nokia, the one who used to do cell phones, not the one who does the network infrastructure. That one is alive and well. And then BlackBerry. I haven't seen a BlackBerry in a long time. I think they're still in business, but I don't know who actually uses them, you know. But they had a lot of dark work. They didn't have a very efficient product owner organization to eliminate useless features. I mean, BlackBerry and Nokia stuck to their guns for a long time because they didn't see it come. They didn't see in the product owner organization where the market was going, and when they tried to react was too late. And they didn't have linear scalability too, because they didn't have a product ownership organization that would enable the engineering organization to produce stuff as quickly as possible to react to the market. Another thing that's very common that impacts agility is this notion of project teams. Let's create projects instead of talking about products. And then we have the so-called scaling frameworks, which is just, in most cases, a poor scaffolding for using waterfall techniques labeled as Agile, and to make people feel good because they have this huge structure that, again, is not minimum, again, is not very viable, and again, is a big bureaucracy. And sometimes they put this translation layer between waterfall and Agile, which just creates fragile. And it has to be removed, otherwise you're never going to have high performance. So a countermeasure for Scrum at Scale is to have what we call an executive action team. These are the people who set up and they own the Agile ecosystem. They usually have people there like HR, finance, systems, legal, the executive sponsor, and those are people responsible for dealing with large impediments, communicating things back to the teams, and getting rid of obstacles in a very expedited and quick manner so you can achieve the highest degree of productivity possible. On the side of the product owner organization, we have what is called the Meta Scrum. And that's where we prioritize everything and we eliminate dark work, things that people are doing that nobody really knows why they are doing or who actually decided to do it. The Meta Scrum is stakeholders, leadership, product owners, is usually run by a chief product owner. It's to align the enterprise around a single backlog for all the products that that enterprise has. It's a forum for the stakeholders. They express their preferences, they remove blockages, they talk about the vision, but without trying to, they don't alter the vision between Meta Scrums. It's usually held at regular intervals, but can also be done on an ad hoc basis and allow teams to progress efficiently down a single work path. So it's very important to have these things done over time so we can synchronize the whole organization. The whole point is to reduce decision latency. Product owners drive priorities, leadership support their priorities. Teams form against a prioritized backlogs, and they're organized to maximize production. Leaders create virtual teams to drive communities, and leadership refactors the organization. It's very important to think about refactoring the organization itself, because an organization tends to have structures that are in place forever. They are not very agile. They just include a high degree of delays. Things propagate very slowly, and decisions are not made timely. And we can see in the spectrum, for instance, companies like Microsoft that changed a lot in the last 3 years, where there was more exposure to the customer bases. Windows 10 is tested almost daily now by people, where before you wouldn't even see a version of Windows before it shipped. There's more people involved in the process, more people have opinions to say, and leadership supports that. And we all know the jump in quality, for instance, from Windows 8, or even worse, from Vista to Windows 10, because things changed and the company refactored itself to enable that change to happen. So what's the secret sauce? Well, continuous integration, test inside the sprint, deploy inside the sprint with continuous deployment, and run your operations inside the sprint. All those things are not really secret. They're very actually easy to do. They just take a little bit of time to get done if you've never done it. I happen to be one of those people who got into DevOps when DevOps wasn't even named DevOps, and this goes back to the early 2000s actually. And we have a huge degree of success running first a pipeline before we even promoted Scrum to our teams, because if we could easily deploy, we could then make things very successful. So what's the Scrum at Scale minimum viable bureaucracy? Well, there are 3 teams: the executive action team, the enterprise meta Scrum, and the Scrum of Scrums. So let's go through each one of them in detail.
And Q, just a couple of questions have rolled in, so maybe right before we get into these roles. Some questions are, can we download the slides? Yes, and they're in the handouts down below. That's the Scaling with Scrum Scale PDF, and we'll also have the Scrum at Scale guide there for you to download easily. And another question, Q, is can you give a few examples of dark work?
Oh, dark work, I'm guilty of that. I was working for an oil company many years ago, and we decided to implement Scrum on my own. I was one of the architects, so we had 3 teams below me. And that's a classical example of dark work. I couldn't find sponsorship from everybody, actually from anybody, to tell you the truth. And we did on our own. And nobody in the organization knew until they got curious why my teams got stuff done so quickly. And then the work kind of turned from dark into light gray and different shades of gray until it came to light. They were a bit slow to adopt. They didn't fully adopt until 6 or 7 years later, by the time I was actually leaving. But there are lots of things that happens in companies, people doing stuff that is not necessarily being done, being blessed, or is in sync with the objectives of the company. Sometimes it's benign, like in my case was actually greatly benign, but in most cases it's actually pretty damaging, because people are going into tangents and doing stuff and building stuff that it's not being prioritized by anybody. You're not really sure if it's going to have market acceptance and things like that. We see that quite a bit in our customers, actually. Any more questions there, Audrey?
When you have a chance, some metrics for determining a high-performing team. Maybe we do that at the end.
Okay, let's leave that to the end, okay? Make a note for me, please. Okay.
All right.
There are 2 loops in Scrum at Scale. Well, one is the cycle. The Scrum Master is the people who concern themselves with the how. And the other one is the cycle of the Product Owner, which is the people who concern themselves with the what, right? So how do we scale the Scrum Master? Well, you know how to do that at a team level if you have done Scrum, right? You have the team, you have the Product Owner, and you have the Scrum Master there, right? And you know what the Scrum Master does. That's very simple, right? It is the guy who does all those things: impediments, shielding a team for interruption, making sure everybody's doing their stuff, making sure there's a culture of continuous improvement, facilitator, etc. We know that. So that's known to us. So how we go up one level, right? Well, going up one level is what we call Scrum of Scrums. And as a matter of naming, Scrum of Scrums for us is the group of teams. And for the sake of the graphic, we did in groups of 5 teams. It can be any configuration you want, just because 5 is 5 people in a team plus the Scrum Master and the product owner. So we decided to keep the 5 team going, you know. So we have in a group of 5 teams, but it can be any number of teams as you see fit. We have that is called a scale daily Scrum. A scale daily Scrum is where the teams, a subset of the Scrum of Scrums of these 5 teams, they meet daily, and is the people who are there to discuss what needs to be done to ensure that the product is marching in the right direction, you know, at the end of the sprint. So they're a mirror of the daily Scrum. Daily Scrum is on a per team basis. The scale daily Scrum is on a per Scrum of Scrum basis. So you have each one of those 5 teams I have here, right? They have their first meeting, and then representatives of those teams go up one level and they get together and they meet on their scale daily Scrum. And that makes sure the people who come to this meeting are the people who have to be there because it's whatever topic needs to be discussed. So the Scrum of Scrums is that group of teams who deliver a joint product. They get together and they work as a whole to produce a shippable increment. And then we have, for the Scrum of Scrums, a role of the Scrum of Scrums master. And my tongue doesn't twist that well, but as you have a Scrum Master in each team, you have a Scrum of Scrums Master, which is a person who is going to coordinate and facilitate everything into that scale daily Scrum. Then you can go up one or multiple levels, depending how your architecture is, to what is called the Executive Action Team, the EAT, which also eats impediments for lunch. I know it's a bad pun, but I'm not really good as a comedian, you know. But as you can see in the graphic, that shows you 125 teams, right? And you see there are groups of 5 teams. They have their scale daily Scrums on a Scrum of Scrums. And each one of those 5 go up one level to the Scrum of Scrums, which is a group of those 25 teams that you see there. And those go up one level to the Executive Action Team. So you can scale this very easily, very organically, in any way that you want. You can either spread in groups maybe of 10 teams instead of 5 and go up one level, or you can reduce the number of teams and go up more levels. So at the top of this is the Executive Action Team. Those are the people who eat the impediments. They mirror the daily Scrum as well. Everything here is done in 15 minutes or less, right? And at this level, at the executive level, you are talking value streams, right? And another responsibility of the EAT is to execute the transformation strategy. Or sometimes they delegate this to what is often called an Agile practice. Initially, this is usually done by the EAT, and then as things start to take shape, there is something called an Agile practice to take care of that, which is a center of excellence, the people who actually take care of the transformation and the leadership, the transformation and that. But as you can see, you can group the teams in a very organic manner in any way that you see fit at your organization. Then, on the other side, we have the people who concern themselves with the what, which is the product owner cycle. And you are used to, if you've done Scrum in a non-scale matter, of having the team. And you have there the PO, the Scrum Master, and the team in there. You know, that's the guy or girl who does the team priorities and concerns themselves with stories and epics, usually, with the what and not the how. We all know what a product owner usually does. So how do we scale this up? Well, in a very similar fashion as we do with the Scrum Master. So we have the Chief Product Owner Meta Scrum. And as you see here, right, again, to keep with the theme, we have 5 teams that come together on a Chief Product Owner Meta Scrum. So there is a Chief Product Owner for all these 5 product owners. Here can be more. 5 is just what illustrates really well in there. This Chief Product Owner is going to set the priorities for multiple teams. It mirrors the same refinement and planning that you would do with a single team. It's a single backlog that's pulled by all the team POs, as you can see in there. And at this layer, that Chief Product Owner is concerned about epics and features. And I know there's different people call things features or epics. In my book, it's historic. Epic is a big story, and a feature is a bunch of epics. There are people who do it different, but just for the clarification how we do that. And this does the cross-team backlog and alignment. Now, if we go up one layer, right, when we group groups of teams, we are going to have a very similar thing to what we saw in the slide for the Scrum Master cycle. So as you can see, we have groups of 5 teams. They're grouped together with a Chief Product Owner. And then we have, for instance, here, 5 groups of Scrum of Scrums groups, the Meta Scrum. And we have a Chief Product Owner that coordinates the work for all these 5 Chief Product Owners, which coordinate the work of all the product owners at the team level. So this is where you set priorities for multiple team groups. And in there, you are talking features and value streams. And again, it mirrors the same refinement and planning that we see before from a team level at groups of team levels. So it just goes up the same way. Now, to make this easier to understand, think about this. Scaling the product owner, you have the product owner, which basically thinks about sprints, team, and validated learning. You go one level up, which is groups of teams, right? You're going to have one group of teams is the Chief Product Owner and thinks about multiple teams, roadmap, and coordinating teams. And if you go one level up, for instance, the Chief Product Owner, you're going to see groups of teams that reporting here. You're talking about value streams, you're talking about vision, you're talking about setting organizational priorities. So that's basically how we scale from the team level all the way to the groups of teams, all the way up to the coordination of those groups of teams. So one of the things I like about Scrum at Scale is we have lots of case studies. And a very good case study for this is 3M Health Information Systems. And as you can see there, we have multiple teams, and you can see the 2 cycles combined, the product owner cycle and the Scrum Master cycle there, and how they go from team level to groups of teams, to coordinating the groups of teams, to going all the way up to the executive action team and the executive meta scrum. And then you can see on that top layer, things like legal, things like customer relations, things like people operations, which is HR, and how they combine together. And you can grow this very organically and very linearly with a very simple bureaucracy. The layers are as minimum as possible to facilitate communication and not to introduce delay. I skipped one slide too fast. One of the one of the favorite case studies that I like is the case for Saab. Saab builds the Gripen fighter, and they're a huge Agile shop. You guys actually can find on the Scrum at Scale site. There's a white paper about the Saab, and they scale 2,000 people in about an hour and 25 minutes. They have an initial daily Scrum at 7:30. They have the first layer, Scrum at 7:45, then at 8, and 8:15, and 8:30, the EAT meet. And by the way, when you get to download the PDF, this QR code will take you to the white paper for Saab and has a complete detail on how they do it and how they start doing it. There's a complete explanation of that. So you can see you synchronize 2,000 people in a little bit over an hour. It's a very efficient system. There is no decision delay. Everything gets resolved really quickly, and there's quite a large number of people. And bear in mind that building fighters involves software, hardware, avionics. There's people doing tooling for engines. There are the pilots that test the plane. There's quite a bit of people involved, quite multidisciplinary way that this has as a project. It's a quite complex project and gets synchronized in a bit over an hour. So it's a great example how you can use Scrum at Scale with its minimum viable bureaucracy to tackle pretty much any project that you can think of. There are multiple case studies at the Scrum at Scale website, and I suggest you take a look. There's some great case studies that can help you decide if that suits your industry. And I think we're about done. So we can go back to questions, Audrey, if you would like to help me.
Great. So if you want to stick around for some Q&A, go ahead and stick it in the box. If not, have a wonderful Friday and weekend. We'd also like to launch a quick poll here at the end to see how soon do you plan to scale Scrum? So are you scaling now? Maybe you're going to get started 3 months, 6 months, a year or more from now. All right. So we're rolling in. Looks like the majority is definitely already scaling. Let's close the poll and see our results. So this is about 100 people who have answered. Pretty good rainbow mix here. Okay, so we will hide our poll and get to some questions. So Q, the question we saved for the end is some metrics to determine a high-performing team.
I will post some examples after the. I actually have a bunch of slides from my Scrum of Scale training class. I will post. I'll pick up some of the slides and give us a PDF. And Audrey, we can send this to whoever attended, right?
Yes. Okay. So then we can
I'll do that. It's a bit easy because I have all the examples there. There's quite a bit of a discussion on metrics and stuff. So I'll just pull those slides as a separate PDF and make sure that everybody receives that.
All right. So someone has asked, SAFe is another methodology. What do you think are the pros and cons?
I usually tell you this. Imagine that Scrum at Scale, if you're, I don't know if you're a programmer, but imagine if you're a programmer, Scrum at Scale is a meta class. And SAFe and other frameworks are instantiations of that meta class. You can have all those things that are in SAFe, which is lean portfolio management and planning and etc. in Scrum at Scale with a much simpler, viable bureaucracy. You don't need to use SAFe to have all those techniques that some people erroneously claim that were invented by SAFe. They're not. Big room planning has been there since 1980s or probably even earlier than that. Lean portfolio management is something you can use with Scrum at Scale without having to do, I mean, it's just a technique. So safe is it's an instantiation of a meta class. It's a pretty heavy instantiation, and you could benefit much more if you use Scrum at Scale with things like lean portfolio management on the product owner cycle and big room planning. You can do that. We don't put a lot of emphasis in planning because honestly, when you have a bureaucracy that can resolve things in less than an hour for 2,000 people, you can adapt your release plan pretty much daily if it needs to be. So you can have an initial planning that doesn't need to be so cast in stone because it can adapt really quick. We believe that decision delay has to be eliminated. And if you try to stick to a plan that's 8 to 12 weeks in the future, you're probably going to be surprised that it's not going to work too well when the 8 to 12 week mark comes. So yeah, you can do big room planning to initially have a pretty good idea, and then you can adapt your release daily very easily by following the Meta Scrum and the EAT model. Any other questions?
All right, so we've had a few questions about Scrum at Scale versus SAFe, so I'm wondering if we can follow up with a webinar to compare and contrast. So keep an eye out on that.
Yeah.
We have one, what is WOW? Where can I get more details about this?
Sorry?
WOW, and then we can follow up. I think if you can give us some more context, I think that's ways of working or...
Yeah. What will be the context?
Okay, and another, do you have any examples of Scrum at Scale in use in architectural engineering design for construction?
I have to look. I'll look and see. I don't remember one right now on top of my head. I have one for drilling of oil and gas drilling that I remember. There is one for home automation that I remember on top of my head. I don't know for architecture. I need to get back at you. If you can give Audrey your email, I'll get back to you probably by Monday, Tuesday. I need to go look. I don't know right now. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, and then one, Scrum at Scale in project management healthcare. So what I think I'll do is I can grab all these questions and we will compile the list of case studies just with links and we'll send out to everybody on the webinar. That way you can get all the details about these case studies.
Yeah, we actually have healthcare, we have 3M, we have GE. There are a few healthcare ones. I worked with healthcare for many years, so I have another one, private, my own case study, because I used to work with healthcare. We have quite a bit. So the best thing is to actually just compile and we'll make a package of material for next week and make sure everybody that's attending the webinar gets part of that with the metrics and all that stuff. We'll make a package of things and publish.
So we'll send out an email. We also have a question about higher ed case study and government. And so government, I just want to do a quick shout out about some events coming up. There's a Government Agility Conference organized by the Business Agility Institute, and that's going to be in Washington, D.C. in November. So I've included a handout down below, but there's definitely an example there with Scrum at Scale. So check out the program on that. If you're looking for the slides still, you can download in the handouts. And then if you want to take a Scrum at Scale class, Q is going to be holding a certified Scrum at Scale practitioner class in Washington, D.C. This coming December, and we'd love to send you out a discount since you've attended. That'll be in the follow-up email that comes to you in about an hour. All right.
And we'll make a package for answers for all the questions, case studies, the metric stuff, and all that stuff. And we'll publish this sometime early next week.
Yes. And John, I didn't miss your question. I saw that come in about other scaled methods like less. We'll include that as well. And thank you so much, everyone. I think we're going to wrap it up now. Send any questions to LitheSpeed. Any of the email addresses will work, and I'll see them. So thank you very much. Thank you, Q, and everyone have a great Friday.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.